Today we are going to talk about the Meiji Restoration from 1868 to 1912. Meiji Restoration began in 1868 in Japan, being an era of major political, economic, and social change. This was an era of modernization and also the change of culture with the Western culture. A little bit of context. Well, in 1860, there was a particular treaty that was called the Treaty of Kanagawa, which opened Japanese ports to American ships, guaranteed them safe harbor, and allowed the U.S. to set up a permanent consulate in exchange for not bombing Edo.
With Emperor Meiji ascension to the throne in 1867, Japan theoretically restored power to the emperor, but because he was only 15 years old, he had little governing powers. Instead, the power rested with the new government consisting of a small close-knit cabinet of advisors. This new cabinet immediately began implementing a series of reforms to both strengthen and unify Japan. One of their largest concerns was that Japan would not be able to regain its sovereignty if it did not modernize. With the recent display of the superior armament of the United States military with Commander Perry in 1853, such concerns were not unfounded.
On January 3rd of 1868 began a civil war started by Tokugawa and ended with his surrender in 1869. This war was created by Tokugawa, who was the last shogun, and was replaced by the young Mutsuhito, the Meiji emperor.
In 1872, the Tokyo-Yokohama Railroad is opened. The Fremont to Boy and Zealand is granted. Compulsory elementary education is instituted.
The Meiji Constitution of 1889, which remained the Constitution of Japan until 1947, after World War II, was largely written by Ito Orobumi, and created a parliament or diet with a lower house elected by the people and prime minister and cabinet appointed by the emperor. The peace and stability of the Tokugawa period and the economic development it fostered set the stage for the rapid modernization that took place after the Meiji Restoration. During the Meiji period, which ended with the emperor's death in 1912, the country experienced significant social, political, and economic changes, including the abolition of the feudal system and the adoption of a cabinet system of government. The leaders of the Restoration were mostly young samurai from feudal domains, historically hostile to Tokugawa authority. Notable Shoshu in far western Honshu and Satsuma in southern Kyushu. Those men were motivated by growing domestic problems and by the threat of foreign engrossment. The latter concern had its origins in the effort by Western powers to open Japan, beginning in the 1850s, after more than 2 centuries of near isolation and the fear that Japan could be subjected to the same imperialist pressures that they observed happening in nearby China.
So now we will be continuing with 3 fun facts. The first one being the samurai guns. Although the samurai were brave fighters and skilled in battle, they eventually realized they couldn't be parried unless they were on even terms. Eventually, the Japanese had to give up on samurai swords and started to use guns. It spawned the phrase, Japanese spirit, Western things. This was the start of the Meiji Restoration. The second fun fact, Commodore Perry. The Japanese samurai first tried to fight the West with swords before the Meiji Restoration, but the Westerners under Commander Perry had vastly superior military weapons. Perry's forces had the most advanced weaponry using handheld guns, large cannons, and giant metal steam-powered ships. And the last fun fact, the federal state. Before the Westerners came, Japan was in a reclusive federal state for 250 years, under the Tokugawa shogunate. During this time, the Japanese used katana and wooden boats to fight their wars, and their weapons didn't really evolve much. Some people claim it was arrogant of them to think they could stay the same and the rest of the world would never exceed them technology.